My feeling is that it's really important for infertile couples who are looking at the options that are open to them to deal with some issues that are very personal about loss, individual loss and loss as a couple, before they can begin to make good decisions about treatment, about using donor gametes, about looking at adoption or choosing a child-free lifestyle. And so in the last 20 years, I've put together a list, I think, of 6 key losses that's good for each member of a couple to examine. One is the loss of control. Loss of control over a part of life that almost everybody in the post-birth control generations takes very much for granted, their family planning. But that's not the only loss of control. They're also losing control of their privacy, their sexuality, losing control of their finances in significant ways. And so the feelings an individual has about being out of control in that way vary a lot from individual to individual. Number 2 is the loss of individual genetic continuity, and that's a very individual thing that's based upon our feelings about genetic connectedness. Some of us were raised in families that have very broad feelings about genetic continuity and genetic connection. We feel that we're all a member of the family of man, and we all, are related to everybody. And those families have a very easy time making the leap to the concept of including members in the family who are not genetically connected to them. But those of us who were raised in families or cultures or religions where there's been a message given to us that blood is thicker than water have a harder time thinking of having our children not genetically related to us in some way. So that's a second loss. A third loss is the loss of an expectation that most of us have when we begin to think about choosing a life partner and building a family with that person, that we are going to blend our genes with that person. You give me 23 chromosomes, I'll give you 23 chromosomes, and what more intimate gift can we give each other than to build a new person with those 46 chromosomes? And our expectations in thinking about that are that this is a way for us to keep our love alive through forever, through eternity, as our bloodline mingles and goes forward. Fourth and fifth losses that go with the infertility experience are related to each other but not quite the same. One is the emotional expectations that we have come to have about the pregnancy impregnating birth experience. This is very much something that's been mediaized. Many of us are fearful that without the emotional connectedness that goes with a couple going through a pregnancy together, that they won't be able to bond and attach to their child. Of course, folks who are thinking that way are forgetting that for those of us who are the early baby boomers, our fathers were out in the waiting room with a handful of cigars, not sitting inside feeding our mothers chips of ice. In fact, our mothers weren't conscious. They had been given ether, and nobody saw us until we were several hours old and all cleaned up and swaddled beautifully, and we managed to attach to our parents. But there is that feeling that without those emotional pieces and physical pieces, 4 and 5 go together, those emotional and physical pieces and expectations we have of what it means to be pregnant, to impregnate, that we won't connect well to our children. And not only that, but that we are not complete as females or males. And finally, the loss of our expectations that most of us have had since childhood, that we will parent, that we will, if we want to, become parents. And frankly, adoption as an issue can only solve one of those losses, and that's the loss of the opportunity to parent. So when I'm working with couples and in the books that I've written about decision making, I'm always suggesting that the way to handle this is for couples to really step back at some point in the process of their infertility treatment and to begin to look at all of their options as they fit into their feelings about the losses they are experiencing with infertility. Each of us as an individual has had a lot of practice in developing a way that we individually deal with loss in our lives, because we deal with loss every day. We've had practice since we were little babies and the babysitter didn't give us our food when we were ready for it. Clear up to when the goldfish died and we flushed it down the toilet, and then when we flunked the algebra test and then asked that cute girl out and she didn't want to go, and then didn't get into the fraternity or sorority that we wanted to in college. All of those instances through our lives that we've had to learn to deal with loss and disappointment in our lives are practice for the big losses in our lives, and we've all developed personal ways of dealing with loss. There are several ways that those who kind of do this professionally see that are typical. For example, some people are substituters. When they experience a loss in one area, they quickly try to find something to plug the hole. And there are a lot of folks who will go to adoption to plug the hole, as an example. They will turn to some other way of getting to their goal as a hole plugger. But there are other people who aren't substituters. There are those who frequently find themselves looking for ways to avoid loss at any cost. I mean, the person who's had a history of losing phone calls that were important to them have answering machines and voicemail and those kinds of things. And these are folks who have a much harder time ending the process of treatment that's intractable and not working, or a particular route to adoption that's resulted in multiple disappointments. But those individual ways that we deal with loss are sometimes things we don't recognize about ourselves and our partner. If we can learn to recognize how we ourselves deal with loss and how our partners deal with loss, then it helps an awful lot in the communication process to see why we aren't on the same page and get us to the same page.